with you and all the things that you're going to experience in life. I'm going to be there. Man, it was like, wow. We'd be pretty energized. Man, God's going to be there. But you know what happens after that? After God speaks? Testing. There's always some test that comes along to see if we really believe it and how we're going to respond to it. So Jacob hoped to get energized by his latter vision because he goes on the journey. He doesn't stay there at Bethel. Well, man, God's here. I better stay here. No, man, that was an experience with God. Now God's going to go with me. He's going to take me to another place. And so he travels on to Mesopotamia. And I'm sure Jacob knew the story about his mother, Rebekah, and how his dad or granddad sent Eleazar to go to his homeland to find a wife for his son. Man, I'm sure he knew that story and knew that, boy, there's some deal about a well and Eleazar hearing from God. So I think his expectations, when he seen that well, and he kind of had an idea where he was by this time, I think his expectations, whoa, God is with me. Yeah, baby, here I am. And he's just all excited about life at that moment. Would God now be able to be pleasing him with the answers to all those promises that he gave? And there's these 3 flocks of sheep. And they're sitting around, and it's about midday. Now, they should be watering them sheep. They should be done getting them off to pasture. And these guys, they don't even say hi to him. You ever have that happen? You go to some place and you feel like everybody's ignored you? Yeesh, that's not a lot of fun. But Jacob's kind of gotten bold. Why did he get bold? Because God's with him. God gave him a vision, and he spoke to him. But then you look at verses 4. And Jacob said to them, my brothers, where are you from? And they said, we are from Haran. Well, that excited him. Yeah, man, that's where my family's from. That's my relatives there. Do you know Laban, the son of Nahor? And they said, well, we know him. Few words, folks. And he said to them, is it well with him? And they said, it is well. And here's Rachel, his daughter, coming with his sheep. And as we can see in verse 7, they still make no effort to move the stone to water the sheep. And here comes Rachel, and she's going to water him. And, Jacob, he's getting kind of, whoa, man, she's a good-looking girl, man. And she's family. And she's got her sheep. He wants to help her out. And then he'd like to get these guys out of the way, probably, so he could talk to them. And so he confronts these idle shepherds. Verse 7, behold, it is still day. Is it not time for the livestock to be gathered, water the sheep, and go pasture them? The implication is, it's midday, and you should have watered the flock and get them grazing and fattening them up, you lazy bunch of fools. That's what's behind those words. And it must have stung them. And they managed to give up a defense in verse 8. We cannot, just feeble attempts. Man, we cannot until all the sheep are gathered. When all them sheep are gathered, it's going to take a long time to water them. But there's a big old heavy stone. I don't think they wanted to try to move it. Maybe they felt inadequate. And are gathered together, and the stone is rolled from the mouth of the well. Then we water the sheep. But they kind of blow it. And they're not doing it. So Jacob meets his family. That's the next point down. And it's Rachel. And while he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was, verse 9, a shepherdess. Aware now that she's not only attractive, but she's relative. And Jacob does what the shepherds had refused to do. Verse 10, the second part of that, and verse 11. Now, this is a big old stone. It took a number of people to roll it away. You're talking about he is on, Chris's terminology, the jazz. He is pumped up, man. It's like he'd been lifting weights, and he is ready to take it all on. And verse 10b, he went up and rolled the stone from the mouth of the well and watered the flocks of Laban, his mother's brother. And then Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted his voice and wept. The text makes it clear that removing the stone, man, that took some strength. That stone that was over there to keep contaminants out of the water. These other shepherds hadn't moved it. It sounds like they needed others to help them along. But he goes with a burst of energy, pushes that thing away, and it seems that after meeting the Lord, he had grown into a man. Man, he was full of strength. Jacob waters the flocks first. It would have taken some time because of the restricted source. But when the last of the sheep was satisfied, he kisses his cousin and wept out loud. And that is not a kiss of intimacy, of sexual desire or anything. Man, it is a kiss of friendship, of being a family member. Man, he has just been on his own. He doesn't know what's ahead of him. And here God has provided immediately by a well, a family member. And in his excitement, man, it's a custom that he would kiss her. It's the first time in the Bible, and one of the only places that a man kisses a woman, not his wife or his betrothed. Jacob, no doubt, saw this as the beginning of the fulfillment of God's promise that he had made to him at Bethel. But did you notice there's something missing here? Did you notice anything missing? I read this a couple of different times, and I went back to read about Eleazar. And what I found that there's no mention of prayer. You don't find any mention of Jacob praying. You find no mention of worship. It's kind of like, well, God made this promise and God's going to do the work, but there's no then giving thanks back to God. Oh, folks, we can live there way too often. We take for granted so often what God has done in our lives. And then we get this, sometimes we get a haughty attitude about it. At each moment, the servant of Abraham, Eleazar, he prayed and he worshiped, and he fell before Laban over and over and prayed and worshiped and gave thanks to God for what he had done. And you wonder if the lack of prayer has something to do with the next part of the story that's going to take place with Laban. You wonder that. I do. I hope what we learn from that little bit is the importance of prayer, the importance of having an attitude of gratitude. You know, I mean, that's what Scripture says, to have an attitude of gratitude, be thankful for all things. Are you thankful? Well, I don't like the way my life is. Thank God you got a life. Hey, whoa, that's a big deal. My oldest sister, I got a call Friday while I'm meeting with this other friend, and my nephew calls and says, I can't talk real long, and I'm meeting with somebody, and he said, Mom's in the hospital. They took her from the doctor's office and said that she had to go to the emergency room right away, and she is now in cardiac care unit. It's like, whoa, you know, you still got life. And you young folks got a long life ahead of you. You know, some of us are on that downward side, you know. We've passed the middle of the road. But you know what? It's still all uphill with the Lord. It's all uphill. Uncle Laban, the schemer. Verse 12b and 14. Rachel, of course, is astounded. Look what it says. She ran, told her father, and as soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, boy, he got excited. You got to wonder about that. His sister's son, he ran to meet him. He embraced him, kissed him, and brought him into the house. And then Jacob tells Laban all the things. Man, I think I'd have left a whole bunch out, man. I wonder, did he tell him about how he stole his brother's birthright? Did he tell them how he deceived his brother? You just wonder because of what's going to happen to him. You know, Laban's no fool, but he also knows that, hey, I'm not going to get any wealth out of this guy. He didn't come with a caravan. Doesn't say anything about a caravan, does it? It doesn't say that he had a bunch of gifts to give, because there's no gift of giving here. It seems like when he left home, man, he was beat-footing it real fast because Esau was hot on his trail, and he was worried about that. And so he takes off. And Laban kisses him, gives him all that. But then, man, there's nothing that Jacob has to offer. And I wonder if Laban realized that now Jacob is at his mercy, and he is highly exploitable because he had nothing. He's just here on his own. From Jacob's perspective, the vision of the ladder and his promise of protection and provision, man, it stood high over his life. God was directing the commerce from heaven on his behalf. The gate of heaven, man, it stood open over his life. And that's a fact, it did. That was true. And it would remain open, but not as he expected. You see, the gate of heaven's open, but it's not always the way we expect. Jesus came, and it wasn't the way the Pharisees and the scribes expected. They wanted it their way. And when it didn't happen their way, they missed Jesus altogether. And sometimes God's working in our lives, and we are so upset about life that we miss God altogether. He needed some growth. He needed to experience some of the pain that he had inflicted on others to help him develop a heart of compassion. He didn't have that. He was like my dad said to me, a mouthful of give me and a handful of take. You know, give me, take. I want what I want when I want it. And he needed to learn some humility because he didn't have that yet. And adding it up, Jacob needed a depth of character. You see, that was missing in his life. He didn't have that. He needed to grow in his faith. And for him to mature, he needed to stop trusting himself. Boy, there's a big point for all of us. He needed to stop trusting himself and to lean wholeheartedly on God. So we have in verses 15 through 13, Jacob is deceived. First part we see is 7 years for Rachel. Verse 15, Uncle Laban slyly raised the subject of wages. And it sounds like, well, I'm going to help out my nephew here. And it sounds like he's being generous. But an attentive reading, it indicates that there was an impetus behind that from his deceitful heart. Look at verse 15. Laban said to Jacob, because you are my relative, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be? Laban's introduction of the subject was followed by anonymous revelation. Verse 16, now Laban had 2 daughters. Boy, that's going to really come to play. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance, and Jacob loved Rachel. The older sibling conflict introduces here that ominous conjuring up of misery between Jacob and Esau, the older and the younger, and it brings that back to light. Jacob's past, I think it's catching up with him. The fact that he abused his brother, that he stole from his brother, didn't seek God out in God's ways, did it his own way. I think it's coming back, and he's got to face it. You see, he has to face himself and what he has done, as well as face God. And it comes back with a vengeance. Leah's weak eyes most likely meant that she had no fire, no sparkle, no pizzazz. You ever see people that have lost the sparkle and the pizzazz? You look in their eyes and you see emptiness. And it always pains my heart when I see people with empty eyes because you know the internal conflict that they're going through at that time. And boy, in the Middle East, man, that was not a prized thing for a person to lack pizzazz and sparkle in their life. Rachel, on the other hand, she's a knockout in Jacob's estimation. It doesn't necessarily mean that she was beautiful by the world standards, She's some top supermodel and all that. No, that would be a wrong impression in them days. In them days, it more likely meant that she was strong-boned and stout. She was a shepherdess, and she could handle the sheep. Remember what shepherds had to do? They had to protect the sheep. So you get the impression that, yes, she was beautiful, especially in his eyes, but she was very capable as well. Whereas Leah, she's weak-eyed and can't see very well, doesn't take care of herself maybe as much. Most ominously, we're told that Jacob loved Rachel, and what a love it was. Man, he offered to serve for 7 years. Man, to indenture myself. That means I am going to be your slave for 7 years. It's not even an employee. He was indenturing himself to pay this debt off. So he would be an indentured slave at that time. And boy, at the end of 7 years, then he would get Rachel for a wife. The normal dowry was what he offered, that 7 years, was at least double what the normal dowry would have been at that time. Man, he was offering an incredible lot. But maybe it also speaks to the fact that he didn't go with any riches that he could afford to pay for her. So, that's the other side of the stone there. But such love. Verse 20, so Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days. That's what love's like. Man, I could do anything, man. I'm so in love. You push and you do it all. Work like a dog to provide, and and you do all the nice little things. That's the picture you have. And next part, verse 21, the deceiver gets deceived. It indicates that Laban was holding out as much as he could from Jacob. So verse 21, give me my wife that I may go into her, for my time is complete. Laban had known that time was complete, but he doesn't want to give in. He's got a free worker here. Why not keep him? Why not stretch this thing out? Laban appears to comply. He gathers all the people together in verse 22, and he has a wedding feast. And at the end of the first day's festivities, the groom wrapped his cloak around his bride, and he takes her in his tent to consummate the marriage. And following that was